Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Movies That Make Us. I'm Jake.
I'm Tracy.
And I'm Val.
And today for this bonus episode, we are talking about a movie called Just Mercy, which came out at the end of last year. It is a story, and we'll get into the story and everything, but we wanted to talk about this movie because there's a lot of stuff going on in the world today, and a lot of confusion. I think for me, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to watch a movie like this and want to talk about it is I've never been on the receiving end of racism. I don't know what that is like, but I want to try to understand, and I want to try to be a better ally and a better, a better friend to those that have experienced it. And I think a big key to that is understanding. And I think movies like this help us to understand that a little bit better.
Yeah, when Just Mercy came out last year, I was a big fan when we did our show on the Oscars and we talked about the snubs. And I was really upset that this movie, it only got 3 nominations when it came to any of the award shows. So it got 2 NAACP nominations and 1 SAG Award nomination for Jamie Foxx. And it is such an incredible movie that it was a little upsetting because I didn't think that some of the movies that were in for Best Movie actually deserved that title last year. But this film, based on a true story, very powerful film, and Jamie Foxx and Michael B. Jordan, I think, really held their own in this film. And, I've seen it like 5 times now, and I'm so happy that Warner Brothers decided that what they needed to do was to make this movie available free for anyone on any streaming platform for the entire month of June, which actually sparked a bunch of the streaming networks like Netflix and Amazon to then pull other movies that you can watch for free, like Selma and one of my favorite documentaries, 13th, if you haven't seen that. And then there's another one called I'm Not Your Negro, which is a fantastic documentary about 3 different people during a time of unrest, which is what we're going through right now. And their stories, 2 of them being Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. So it's there's some really fantastic movies and documentaries out there for you to watch right now if you need to spark a conversation with you, your family, and your friends. If you feel like Jake, myself, and I think probably Tracy, that you want to understand something a little bit more. And these are very well-made movies. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. This movie, it hits so hard because I don't know about you guys, but I spent a lot of my life thinking that we were further along in our progression as a people against racism than we are. And unfortunately, over the last however many years, that veil has been stripped away. And it's become so clear that we're not nearly as far as I thought we were, because like Jake said, I'm isolated. I'm a white guy. I'm now middle-aged. I live in Taylorsville, Utah. I'm not being oppressed. I'm not being, moved against. And stories like this are so important because people really turn to the movies. It can be an entertainment value, but it can also be an educational value as well. And this managed to be both. It didn't come across as preachy. It didn't come across as and I don't know what the word I'm trying to say, but it didn't come across as trying to. It was just trying to tell a story, and it's a very powerful story.
Yeah. And I want to, without making this a hugely educational podcast, which I think it's okay if this one is a hugely educational podcast, because that's what we need right now. Civil rights in our history has always been something that I have studied my entire life. And I was very excited when my daughter was in junior high, because that's really when we as Americans really learn about civil rights and the civil rights movement. And when she was in junior high, they let her watch Selma at her school. And I would pick her up from school at the time. And I would always ask her, so what'd you learn today? And we would talk about, what, and she's like, we watched Selma. And for the next 4 days, we had great conversations. And when I watched it again yesterday, she came downstairs, sat with me, watched it with me. We had another great conversation. And that's what it's all about, is we need to have conversations, especially with our kids, about what's going on, because most of them, at least with my daughter, she doesn't understand why people are racist because she wasn't brought up. I never taught her that at all. She doesn't understand that because in my family, between her and I, we accept people, right?
Right.
And you said, however long, it was July 2nd, 1964, when we passed the amendment that everyone, including them, had Black people had the right to vote, had the right to do things. That was a long time ago, but at the same time, not very long ago.
Yes, absolutely.
It's long enough ago that we should be further along than we are right now. But the very person, the girl that was the first girl that went to a non-segregated school, just turned 72.
Wow. Yep.
So she's still living. So again, it's like, it's this thing where it hasn't been long enough, but it also has been long enough. We should be further along than what we are. The things that are happening on the streets right now of cities across our nation are the same things that were happening in 1963 and 1964 to get them rights, to get all of us rights, but we're still like, why are we doing this now? Like, why aren't we further along? So I think there's a lot of anger, unrest, there's not understanding. And so I think, like you said, movies and documentaries are so powerful because they tell stories to us that we would never know otherwise, which is that's why media is so powerful, because we can actually see inside someone's life that we wouldn't know. We are sitting in a jail cell in this movie with 3 or 4 different characters of different stories and trying to understand what it would be like to be them, because us 3 would never know that ever.
Yep.
Right.
So it's interesting when we talk about this was my experience watching this movie. So I'm a history major. That's what I studied in school. And so I feel pretty comfortable with a lot of my knowledge in history and whatever. But when I think about things like the civil rights movement and things like that happened in the 60s, to me, that was before my life. So it was a long time ago. That's part of history.
Right.
When this movie started and I realized that this was in the late 80s and that this trial is in the early 90s, that's all of a sudden part of my lifetime. And you start to realize this isn't a story that happened before the Civil Rights Bill was act was passed. This isn't a movie that happened, at the turn of the century in the 20th century. This is a movie that happened within all of our lifetime. And what's even more shocking, like his one of the other inmates on death row, at the end, it talks about how he was released in 2015.
Yeah.
So another 23 years that he had to sit on death row before they were able to get him out. And there was no evidence for his case either. He was found guilty because the prosecutor could tell just by looking at him that he was guilty. That was what his verdict hung on. These are stories.
When you're in prison for 30 years, what do you do after? This is a totally different
Your
world
life
now.
has been ruined. Yep.
You don't know anything about computers. You don't know anything about the internet.
There's nothing we can give back to this man.
And they mentioned that. They mentioned that in the movie there. When Michael B. Jordan is talking before the court, and he says, "We can never give back what we took away from this man." Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And in a weird parallel. So, and Jake, I'm glad you brought this up with history, because when I was being taught history, it was a lot of memorizing dates and like the treaties, and it was just boom, 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 bullet points. And when I got older, and then I started to learn the stories behind these events, I love history now, whereas before I could have cared less when I was younger. And talking about media that informs us, I mean, Val, did you watch the new Watchmen that was on HBO?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I had no idea about Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the Black Wall Street massacre that occurred. A massive thing that happened in our history. I had no idea until I watched it a couple months ago. I had no idea that happened.
That Watchmen is so powerful in so many different ways. And I feel like it's kind of like the secret show that not many people are talking about. But just talking about history and history books, yesterday, the statue of Robert E. Lee was taken down. Right. And we were sitting around the dinner table last night talking about that. And granted, so I have my dad that's 76. I've got my daughter that just graduated from high school that's 18, and myself. And my daughter didn't learn that much about Robert E. Lee in her history classes because things have changed so much about what we're teaching kids now. Right. Whereas when I learned about Robert E. Lee, he was almost a hero in the history book. And so I had to then have this conversation about who Robert E. Lee was. And when my dad learned about Robert E. Lee, it almost hurts his feelings, not that my dad's a racist, but that a part of that history is being taken down because when he was learning about it, it wasn't that far from, there was a part of his generation that he grew up with that experienced all of that. And so
his grandparents experienced that.
It's so different. And I very much want to make sure that those things that are being taken down go up in museums so that we still have conversations about why these were put into place, because we don't want to just hide history. I'm very much about, we need to talk about history, good, bad, ugly, everything. But it just shows you the difference between my dad's history book, my history book, and my daughter's history book, because for so long, our generations were not taught the history of Black history. Like we would have a couple days a year that we would be taught Black history, know, and luckily when I was in elementary school, the movie Malcolm X came out, and so did the book. And that's kind of when I, caught the bug, I guess. I don't know, that I was just like, this is a history that I'm not being taught anywhere else. I read the book, watched the movies, and I was hooked because I wanted to learn about this whole other America that I didn't know about, and, started talking to my parents about it and realized that my mom's family was very much, a part of some of that history as well. And so, it's an unrest in time right now, but we've gone through bigger unrests. But I feel like we need, if we actually want to make the change that needed to happen in 1962 and after, we need to do this push. So this movie really shows, even for Michael B. Jordan, I thought it was very interesting because Michael B. Jordan is a Black man who went to Harvard Law School. And when he got out of Harvard Law School and decided to make the choice to go back to his hometown and to help these death row inmates, he had never been treated like this before, because like we said, or like Tracy, like you said, this is in our time period. So where he was living before and where he went to school, he didn't see what the Deep South and how they were still treating people.
Well, and
so when he, I thought it was a pivotal moment when he, he keeps talking to the inmates and they're like, it's different down here. You can't do this and that. And he's like, this is the law. This is what we should be doing. He didn't understand. And then when he went into the prison for the first time and the guard makes him go in another room and strip down.
Oh, that scene
not
was
because of
so
anything
hard.
except for the fact that he was Black, because you don't need to ask an attorney to do that. That's not protocol at all. But he did it because he was Black. And Michael B. Jordan, when the officer leaves the room, is almost in tears because he realized things have not changed at all.
Right.
And I think that that's an important thing to point out. We've talked about a lot of things historically speaking, and the reality is, and this is where we need to be more aware, but the reality is when we're talking about things in history, this is everyday life for people in the world today,
Right.
in the United
Yeah.
States of America. When he gets pulled over by the deputies after he's gone and visited with the sheriff and the DA, and he's kind of saying, you know, this is why I'm bringing up the file to dismiss the case and whatever. And but then when he gets pulled over and the deputy has him get out of the car and he's pointing a gun at the back of his head, and he, even up to that point, is trying, you know, as he's outside of the car and they're going through his stuff, and one of the deputies says, "You better be careful what you say when you've got a gun pointed at your head."
Right.
I have been pulled over by the police before, but I have never once felt threatened by the
Right.
police.
Right.
But a reality for a lot of people, our fellow citizens in this country, is when they get pulled over by the police, this is the experience that they have, or the fear that that's the experience that they're going to have. And the fact that that kind of a life is a reality for anyone who lives in this country is abhorrent and
It's
wrong, and we
unacceptable.
need to fix it. And so it's interesting because we do talk about these things that happened in the past as a part of history, and I think that it's really to our detriment. Having studied history, it's interesting because you look at it and you can put things in perspective, but you can see these same kind of things happening today. So when we talk about segregation and the civil rights movement and all of that as parts of history, sometimes it's almost to discount that it's still going on today. And the systemic racism is still there today. And I'm not saying every police officer is racist. I'm not
Right.
saying that every police officer is corrupt, but I am saying that there
There's
is
enough that
systemic.
it's a problem.
Yes, and we need to fix it. It's not who we are. And this movie really, for me, put a lot of that into perspective, because this wasn't some long ago time. This was within my lifetime. This was when we had color TV. This was when, you know, all of the stuff. And to see what the hoops that he had to go through to even get a retrial where they would even talk about the case being, and the charges being dismissed. And the fact that he had to take it up to the state Supreme Court before that was even granted was incredible to me, because as he uncovered the lack of evidence that was there,
Well, and
just incredible.
the frustrating part too is you've got a new prosecutor who didn't prosecute him originally, who should be more of a neutral, but he says it. He's like, I'm getting pressure from the mayor. I'm getting pressure from the city council. I'm getting pressure from my neighbors. And he goes down this path for a while, and luckily course corrects and finds the right way to go. But and thank heavens for today's technology. I mean, we're seeing pretty much in real time some of these abuses happening. You've got people who are being pepper sprayed, and people who are being shot with rubber bullets, and people whose car windows are being blasted out with tasers and being pulled out of their cars, just for having the audacity of saying that what is happening isn't right. And that, I think, is going to bring more of a sea change than just people. It's brought more attention. It's made it more visceral. It's made it more real. It's in people's faces. You can't deny it. Like, before it was like, oh, I heard a story about somebody who knew somebody. And now it's like you can watch these things right there. And to see these protests that are happening all around the world, you're seeing this in Paris and in Rome. And I mean, it's amazing. John Boyega, the Star Wars actor, and his speech, if you haven't watched that yet, it's only like 4.5 minutes, but oh my gosh, it is just so powerful. He's so raw and so real and so emotional. And it's heartbreaking when he's like, every one of us knows what it's like to be erased. It's like you don't exist or you shouldn't exist. And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, if it's so hard. It's been a really rough week. I gotta say, like, it's been a really rough couple of weeks, but last week, because this is coming out on Monday, I think was really rough on a lot of people. To see these videos, like you said, come up, and and I don't want this to sound horrible, but these movies and these documentaries have been out. This information has been here. And like I said, this movie, Just Mercy, it was kind of overlooked last year.
Mhm.
And it shouldn't have been. Just like another movie that's on, we put together a list of the top 20 Black Lives Matter movies that we think you should pick up. And in my top 5 is a movie called The Hate You Give, which also the year before, and it came out in 2018, was a movie that was very overlooked, but very much shows teenagers and I think parents how this is something that regardless of your age, if you're Black, you're Black. And for
Right.
some people, it doesn't matter that you're a child or that you're elderly or that you're a man or a woman. There is hate there, and there is stereotypes there, and there is racism there. But these movies have been out. This information has been here. And luckily now people are paying attention. But, I think a lot of the anger and frustration is, why did it take this to make you pay attention? But I'm happy that people are paying attention now.
Yeah. And I'm guilty of that. I mean, I hadn't seen Just Mercy until last night. And I try and reach out and explore. I love watching movies that teach me or explain to me or put me into a different culture, a different time. But I realized, and I've known this for a while, and I'm trying to do better, but I'm just very privileged in where I live and how I live and my circumstances. And it is just, I'm one that's a little late to the party, because like I said, I thought we were further along than we are. But I love what Jake said earlier about trying to learn and trying to become a better person and a better ally. And yeah, I'm a little late to the party, but better late than never, right?
Yeah, I agree. Well, and I think it's, for all of us to admit that we understand our privilege. Like, I had to explain white privilege to my daughter. I really thought she understood what it meant. But I think a lot of young people don't understand what white privilege means. And then when I explained it to her and she understood it, you could see in her face, you could see her change. You know what I mean? You could see the thoughts, because, again, we talk about this stuff a lot. And at the beginning of Selma, when there are 2 kids that, when she saw it, that were only a couple years younger than her, when the church explodes. And I said, there are people, and this is what I told her in 7th grade, there are people and there are kids in America right now that fear for their lives, like these kids that are your age, that fear to walk to school, that fear to get into a car. When my daughter turned 16, I did not have to sit her down and say, okay, you have a driver's license now. These are the things that you have to look for and the things that you have to worry about. Okay, now you're an 18-year-old girl and you're going out into the world. We need to have another talk. Like, I've had to have girl talks with her, but I've never had to have the color of your skin talk with her.
Yeah.
That is privilege. That is the difference between me having a kid and, my friend having to sit down her sons and say, at 8 years old, these are the things that you have to fear. That's the privilege that I have.
Well, I saw a post online that really struck me too. Is this guy was saying, these are the things my mom taught me about what I need to do when I go out in public. And one of which was, you always get a receipt and you always put your purchase in a bag and you take that with you until you get home. And you have both of those things, because then they can't accuse you of, I mean, they could still accuse you, but it lessens the chances that you're going to get accused of shoplifting or something like that. Yeah.
Well, and in the movie, The Hate You Give, one of the things that, because this kid gets pulled over in the movie, the one thing that they tell their kids is, when you get pulled over, you keep your hands on the steering wheel and you don't move them, and you don't fight, and you don't talk back, and you don't. And so, like, this is something her dad has told her forever, and her uncle is a police officer. And so she immediately does that the minute her friend's pulled over. But those are the things, that you have to teach your kid. I've never had to teach my kid that ever.
Right.
Well, and you can see that in this movie, in Just Mercy, when he gets pulled over, that's exactly what he does. He puts his hands up above the steering wheel.
I'm doing
where they can
exactly
be
what you
seen.
say, officer.
Yeah, and he's very respectful to the officer. And as he's undoing his seatbelt, he says, "I'm reaching down to undo my seatbelt so that they know I'm not reaching for a gun and things like that. I'm going to get out of the car now, like you asked me to do. I'm opening the door." And you can tell that he has been taught what to do when he gets pulled over by a police officer.
Right.
And then you see these posts come up with, "These are the rules that I was taught, and this is what I was told to do." These are things that people are learning because they have to. Because if they don't do it, then there could be consequences. And I was never taught those things.
I
as a
wasn't
kid.
either. Mm-mm.
It's just a very different world, and you can see that throughout this movie, and how the system can be rigged against certain populations, and in this case, the African American population in this town, Monroeville, Alabama, and in the area, because as he's going through, and he has presented a case that on the defense side is just rock solid. I mean,
Right.
he has shown that there are multiple statements from multiple witnesses that were with Johnny D the morning of the murder that can say he was not anywhere near where the murder happened. He was here at this can't remember what it's called, but the kind of the party that they were having, it was a fish bake or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a name and I can't remember the name, and it's really bugging me that I can't right now. But they've got all these witnesses. He has an audio tape of the key witness for the prosecution saying, "No, I never saw him there. I'm not going to lie, because I'll tell you right now, I never saw him at the cleaners. I never." And then he gets him even on the stand, and even in the moment when he's faulty, I mean, that was such a powerful scene. He could tell he's looking at the sheriff and he's feeling threatened, so he's going to start lying. So Michael B. Jordan places himself between him and the sheriff and has him instead look at Johnny D. And that's when he decides to tell the truth.
That was a really subtle moment, which
Yes,
I like. It didn't hit you over
powerful.
the head. It was, very subtle.
That moment reminded me of, like, if you've ever tried to talk to a kid with their parent in the room and you're trying to get like what their response would be, because I've taught kids before and they always look at their parents like, am I saying the right thing? I've had to do that, like, okay, but what do you think about
like, don't look at mom and dad, look at me.
Get in front of the parents. And that's very much, I think, what the whole corrupt system in Alabama for this specific story is, that there were some really, really bad people up here and they ran everything. But if anyone else admitted to that, not doing this, everything was going to fall. And it's very much kind of what's going on right now.
Well, and when he gets that statement from the witness, who says, "No, I lied. I never saw him there. Like, I'll tell you what, and I know that it's going to ruin my life, but what else do I have to lose? I'm already in prison for the rest of my life. What else are they going to do to me?" And, when he's out then talking with Johnny D and his family comes over, and everything, and they feel like they've won, like it's going to happen. But then when the judge comes back in and says, "No, there's no reason for a retrial," and basically shuts it down, and you realize that the system is just, the people who are in power are not the people in office, but the people who put those people in office. Those are the people in power.
Right.
And those are the people that want to keep the status quo, and they don't want all of this to come up again. They don't want to admit that they were wrong in the past, and they weren't. To them, it didn't. They wanted someone to hang and pay for that crime, and they didn't care whether it was the right person or not. It was much easier to blame this person.
Get the conviction and move on.
Yeah. And like at that moment when he realizes that it's not going to, I mean, his case was so solid. It was so airtight. I mean, it leaves way more than a shadow of a doubt. It's enough to say, yeah, we need to have a retrial for sure. And the judge just says, nope. Like, to me, that was an amazing thing. Not like amazing great, but like amazing unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
You could
And
see like on the first day when he gave when he was giving the stuff to the judge and he was saying like, and they didn't give you this information and they didn't give you that information. The judge even looks at him like, oh my gosh, you guys. And then so you think he's
yeah,
going to come back and
Right.
say retrial. But in that time that he went away for a week, I think it was
Somebody
a week,
got to him.
and then came back. Somebody got to him and he's like, no, I don't believe any of this. You know, we're done. Go back to jail. Like, but like the face that he gave was like, oh my gosh. But then it's not really up to him. He's not running that
Yep.
courtroom,
Right.
you know?
And that's what people are fighting against. And how,
Right.
how do you beat the system when it's the whole system? When you're not
Mhm.
talking about just individuals who are racist, but when the whole system is racist against you, how do you beat that system?
Yeah.
And
Right.
the only way that we can do that is when everybody stands up and says, this is wrong and it
This is
needs to be
unacceptable.
changed. Yeah.
Yeah. We need a hard reboot right now.
Mhm.
Yep. Well, we have an opportunity. It's an
And
election
looking
year. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Get informed
Looking at
and
the
vote.
looking at the list of movies that we're going to put up on the website, what you said about, you know, the system being rigged and the trial being rigged, even with all the information, there's at least 5 or 6 movies in here that are the same thing, you know, where is like, you know, the number one movie, which is actually a docu-series on Netflix called the When They See Us, that's all based on someone wanting to say, we got the person, let's just wrap this up, we can say that we caught the bad guy. And it happened to be kids, you know, it happened to be kids, and we've talked about the Central Park 5 before, but that whole story is based on one prosecutor saying we need to have somebody to blame, and this is my story and I'm not going to move regardless of how much information or how much, you know, you bring to me. This is it. And those kids suffered
Because
until they were grown men.
the people in those communities don't have the ability or the power to speak up against it, and if they do, they'll be shut right back down. So you don't. It's so hard because it's like disposable in a way. Like these people are disposable. Well, we'll put the blame on them. They'll go to jail. It's just one black person. What does it matter? And that just it's so. It just blows my mind because it is so anti everything that I try and be and stand for. And again, like here's the other thing too, is we always think that this is like a big city problem, right?
Mhm.
Like this happens in New York, this happens in Detroit. The march in Salt Lake was just a week ago where a police car was flipped and set on fire, and we had bow and arrow guy and all the craziness. But it was so weird to be watching this live on TV and going, I know exactly where that's located. That's just up the street from my work, as opposed to it's somewhere else. It really hit home.
One of my really good friends is a former police officer with one of the departments or one of the agencies that was called in to help Salt Lake. So as he was watching it, it wasn't just, oh, I know where that street corner is, but it was, oh, there's my buddy so-and-so, and there's my friend. One of his good friends when he was a police officer there's a video that's out there of one of the police officers going around and handing out water to some of the protesters.
I saw that. Yes.
And he said, oh, that's my old work bestie. Like I know him really well from when we were together as police officers. And so just things like that. Like for me, I don't remember there ever being a time where something like this was happening so close to where I live.
Yeah. I was talking again to my daughter about this because if the pandemic wasn't going on, we would have been at most of these rallies because, you know, she's a photographer. We want to record history, but we also want to lend our voices. But because she's high risk, and her boyfriend's mom is high risk, she's awaiting to get a heart transplant any day. So we have to be very careful about what we do. Like we wanted to go. And so we actually went up Sunday, the day after the first one on Saturday, to see if we could hand out water. Of course, we had masks on and gloves and kind of see, you know, what people were feeling. And it was so amazing because we actually ran into a man and his son, and he's black and his son is black, and his son is in first grade and just like a ball of energy, this cute kid. They just moved here from Arizona 2 months ago, and they were out cleaning up our city the day after because it's now their city. But he said he wants to teach his son that, yes, it's okay to stand up for what you believe in and to go out and to protest, but it's also good, equally as good, to go clean up after your mess the next day. And when Sammy and I were speaking to this man, this couple came up that were probably in their 20s, and they were heading to the Green Pig to have lunch, and they stopped and asked if they could help. They found out within 2 minutes that the white guy and the black guy, and I'm saying this because it's very in context, they're from 2 towns apart in Arizona.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
And in that moment, like, it gives me chills, and I kind of get a little watery because we think that we're so different from each other and that our worlds are so far apart, but they are not so far apart. Yes, there's a huge amount of things that African Americans, Black people have to struggle with that we don't, and they live right next door to us. Right. People that are our best friends, that are our family, that are our neighbors, are struggling, and they live in the same world, the same neighborhood. Mm-hmm. They go to the same churches, the same schools that we do, yet we're not struggling that struggle. Why are we not helping them? They're helping us every day. Mm-hmm. And I'm like you, Tracy and Jake, like, I'm definitely not against the police force. I have a lot of friends that are police. I respect police, but there are a lot of corrupt systems. When you add people to things, then things go wrong because humans are humans, and some of us are dicks and some of us aren't. Right. And it's just a broken system across the board. And I think these movies are so, so powerful. This one in particular, another one that we've talked about is Black Klansman. Mm-hmm. That's a great movie. That didn't happen very long ago, as well. But yeah, just to think that this man in Just Mercy is probably, I mean, he's passed away, but there are people that he was in death row with that are now off death row, that are now watching these things happen and wondering, like, like that woman who just turned 72, who went to the first desegregated school, and she's watching this. In her lifetime, there's been so many fights, and you can just imagine their frustration about, like, why isn't it fixed yet? Right. We've pretended for a long time that it's fixed, but it's not fixed.
Well, so did you see the little short film that Spike Lee put out just this week?
Not yet. I haven't been able to watch that.
No, I haven't seen it.
So basically what he did is he took scenes from Do the Right Thing, which came out back in 1989, and he intercut this with footage of George Floyd and with some of these other people. And it's so hard hitting because it's like this same crap is still happening, and over and over. And it's just this cycle. And Val, I applaud you for having these conversations with your kid, with Sammy, and Jake. I'm sure you, with your kids, we've got to teach this next generation. So I was brought up to be like colorblind. Like, I didn't care if somebody was black or brown or whatever. It didn't make a difference to me. But whereas, like, my dad would sometimes say something, there's a nut that's a Brazil nut that has a racist nickname. And he would call it by that. And my grandma used to talk about how she'd be so upset that the Spics were moving in across the street. And so we're getting a little bit better and a little bit better each generation. But I didn't understand until I was more of an adult as to the struggles that these people are facing. And like I said, I spent a lot of time thinking we were much further ahead than we are. So we've got to explain to the kids, this is a problem that's still happening. And we've got to be able to move past that. And hopefully this next generation or two will be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, and it depends what we teach them.
Right.
And I think that has a big, the other day, I had changed my little frame on Facebook. Obviously such a little thing that you can do, but I changed my frame to Black Lives Matter. And then shortly after that, my son changed his, and I asked him about it. And he said, well, yeah, because I saw that you changed yours and I thought that was really cool. And it made me realize, whether
Wow.
we think about it or not, our kids are watching what we do, and they're watching us in these moments. They're
Right.
watching us to see how we react, to see what our thoughts are. And the things that we say and do right now are what they're going to learn and take away from this experience. And it can be something where the next generation or two, things change and for the better, or it can be the same things over and over again.
Right.
And I think that that's where we have to make sure that we're passing along the right information. And it's hard. I don't know, because I know plenty of other people that aren't.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And these are
Yeah.
hard conversations to have, but we've got to have them.
And so I was going to say, we have to have uncomfortable conversations with our kids, because it's only when you're uncomfortable that change actually happens. And so we need to be uncomfortable for a long time. And it's so great. Again, I'm going to say it again, that all of these streaming networks they're putting this content, this educational content out there for you to use at your fingertips, and watch them with your kids. If you need to watch all the documentaries first and then watch them with your kids. But this is the thing. And I've said this before, I learned more by watching Schindler's List about what happened during that time than I did in a history class. Do you know why? Because those images were uncomfortable.
Right.
Because it made me feel horrible, and I will remember it forever and ever. Watching this movie, Just Mercy, watching things like I Am Not Your Negro, which is so powerful. And you guys have said a lot of things that he talks about in that documentary that explains like why people kind of feel that African Americans are so disposable. And it's because at one time they were property, all the way up in the 50s and 60s. They were property to some people. So that's why some people still treat them as property. And so they are easily dismissed and disposable. And the way they explained it in this movie to me, like, I've understood it before, but I understood it so much that, again, we have the ability to learn. And I'm just holding up my list, like, of all the notes of things that I've taken over the last 2 weeks. We have the ability to learn things that our parents weren't able to learn.
Right.
That our grandparents weren't able to learn because they were living it and struggling between what was right and what was wrong. We don't have an excuse.
Right.
Our kids don't have an excuse, because we have at our fingertips something that can totally ruin us, which is the internet, but also that can totally teach us exactly what we need to learn. And I would say this right now, we as white people, as not people of color, need to be learning from people of color.
Right.
And these movies and these documentaries that we're going to be posting on our website and Facebook, these are movies and documentaries made by people of color, telling us their stories, telling us how they have had to survive, and kind of telling us what we need to understand.
Right.
And it's so powerful that we're able, and we have the privilege to watch these movies and get this information, because there are so many people that don't, and we should really take advantage of this information.
Well, our good friend Mike from Watchtower, he has posted some stuff, and he's a Pacific Islander, but he relates so much as to what's going on. And I want to give him a shout out, because when the protests were happening, he and Corey were posting on Facebook, and they're like, if you need a place to go that's going to be safe, that we're going to take care of you. If you just need water, if you just need whatever, come down. We're just down the street. We're out of the way from the protests that are happening, but come down and we're gonna take care of you. I loved the story that came out of I think it was New York, or maybe no, I think it was Boston, where a guy from who was a recent immigrant, just from like a year or two ago, from the Middle East, saw these people trying to get away as curfew was happening, and he let them into his house. He let like 100 people into his house and fed them pizza and let them spend the night there. And police were tear gassing the house and flying a helicopter over the top. And it's those little moments of humanity that's going to propel us through this. I believe, I really do. It's the kindness. It's the little things.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's really what Michael B. Jordan's character in Just Mercy did for, all of these people he was helping in their family. There's a scene when he first goes to the house with all of the family, the neighborhood, people from church, and they're all there looking at him. And he's just this young kid, green-eyed from Harvard, thinking he's going to change the world. And they're like, there have been 6 people before you.
Right.
What?
And they took our money and then they left.
What's different about you, and, that had to be, he had a lot of trials and tribulations, but you're getting pushed back from both sides here. You're trying to help the family, but at the same time, giving hope to people sometimes, especially when they've been hopeless for so long, is a really hard thing to do when you don't know that you have 100% have the right answer for them, and that it's going to, what's going to happen in the end. And that was, they had him sitting. I love the camera work in this film because they have him sitting low, and they strategically have all these people and it just makes him look so small and so vulnerable, and he takes a breath and he's just like, I want to help you, and I'm not going to take any of your money. And he goes through this big long speech, and then someone at the end of the speech said, you had me at, it's not going to cost us any money.
Yeah.
But I love the fact in that scene, the first thing that he says is, I want to hear from you. And I think that's the attitude that we all need to take, is we need to learn from each other, from these people who have experienced these things. I get so tired of being online sometimes where it just is this shouting match. And it's like, you're not having a conversation. You're just being a jerk to somebody else online because you can.
Yeah.
And the other scene, I think the most powerful scene in the movie is when the judge overturns, or when the judge says, no, we're not going to have a retrial. And the son stands up and he's like, you can't do this to me again. And I can't remember. There's another movie where the basically the phrase is, hope is a very dangerous thing. Yeah. And in that moment, it's like, you gave me hope. This is what I was expecting. My dad was on death row. He's never going to get out. You gave me hope that this was going to happen. And now you're tearing this all away from me again. It's almost worse the second time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that scene to me was the top scene in the movie. I love that scene.
Yeah. I don't know if Jake's still slow.
Yeah, and it was so powerful.
You've been in and out a little bit.
I know. I don't know if you guys can hear me or what's happening. I'm having more technical difficulties. I'm gonna pop out and pop back in. So you guys keep going, and I'll be right back.
Do we let him in, Val?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll let him back in. I just love that there was a moment where
I can let myself in if I do
still,
it right. Yeah.
But he was talking. He was really good at.
Like, that's a cool magic trick. It's like ventriloquism.
Yeah, it was great. But I mean,
all right.
Again, this is probably one of our most serious shows that we have ever had. But I think we need to have these serious shows, and we need to have these serious talks, and we need to talk about these movies that make us sad and that make us uncomfortable. Right. And the fact that we even have these movies. I was watching a documentary this morning. You guys remember the movie that came out a couple of years ago that was huge at Sundance, called The Birth of a Nation?
Yep.
This documentary is called The Birth of a Movement, and it's about the first blockbuster in American film. Was actually The Birth of a Nation, but before it was that, it was Klansman. Right. That's what the name of it was. And some of the people in this documentary, people of color, said this was probably the most racist movie ever made. However, it was also probably the most truthful movie ever made by a white man ever about how they felt at the time. And such a great documentary. And then if you haven't seen A Birth of a Nation, obviously a great, powerful movie. The movie that came out a while ago, not the original.
Not the
but the one
1907 version, yeah.
Yeah, not the 1907 version. Although that one is very powerful as well
It
because
is. I was exposed to that in film school for the first time,
yes,
and
so
my
was I.
jaw was on the floor. I'm like, wait, what?
They
It's
do everything
insanely
in that,
racist.
they do everything in that movie that makes that you should feel uncomfortable when
Mhm.
watching, because at the time they didn't allow people to really be people of color in the cinema, and so it was a ton of
It's
blackface and a
blackface.
ton of racism and
Right.
just. But again, I thought it was so powerful that guy said it was probably the most truthful movie made, because they did not hold back at all. There was no political correctness. There was nothing. And at the
It was a
time,
celebration at the time. It was a
yeah, it was,
celebration of how white Christian males from the dawn of time up until now are the greatest thing that ever happened.
and it came out the same year that the NAACP was forming. And so there was this like combustion of, we now have the NAACP, we have this hugely racist movie, and the NAACP didn't quite know what to do with it. And so some independent people of color filmmakers had to make their own version of the film, which wasn't really, not a lot of people got to see it. And they thought that movie was going to cause a riot.
Right. Right.
Because it was depicting, more of a realistic fact of things from their point of view. So again, all of these movies and this information has been around for a long time. It's just how you see it, and then what you do with that information after you see it. And so many people are asking also where to donate or how they can help. And I
Mhm.
think what we'll do with this list of movies that we're going to put up is we can also put up some links and resources about where you can help and where you can donate. And we want to hear from you. Like,
Yeah.
what did you think of this film? Are there any films out there that are not on our top 20? Now, of course, there's hundreds of films, but we had to put it into some kind of list. So the top 20 list, I actually started out with top 10, and then I'm like, no, I got to put this one on. Then it went to top 15, and then I was like, no, but this one is so good. So it went to top 20. And so there are hundreds and hundreds of films and documentaries that are so important. So if there's one that you see that is not on this list, please make sure that you post it on our Facebook page after we post the list so other people can see it, and again, utilize that as well. Because again, we're just so lucky that we have so much media out there and entertainment out there that is actually educational for us. Hey, Jake, you're back.
I'm back. I'm really sorry, guys.
You're okay.
But yes, I love the list. I'm excited about the list. And I think that it's definitely worth sharing and talking about. There is a lot out there. And I think the more we can take in, the better. And especially to experience something that's outside of ourselves, which is what a good story should do, I think, or one of the things that a good story can do is help us experience something outside of ourselves, and in the end, discover a little bit more of ourselves in it. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to note that the list would probably be different if a person of color or people of color were putting
absolutely.
it together.
Right.
But obviously, these, as being a white woman, these are movies that, as I was watching them, made me want to go and learn more, struck a chord with me. And of course, I'm going to be talking to Tracy and Jake about them, and they're, going to give 2 cents, and it will be a group collaboration of a list. But these are movies that moved us to learn more and to start a conversation. And so that's what that list is. And again, if you have a list of your own, that you think we should share, we would definitely love to see that as well. Or if you have resource links to where people can now go and help, because the biggest thing is you see it, you learn about it, and then you try and help change it. If you have any resources for volunteering, for donating, for petitioning, let us know and we can share those as well.
Yeah, we can't let this be a flash in the pan. We can't be this, well, it happened and then we move on. This has to be something that we carry on as individuals, as a community, as a nation, as a world population. We've got to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. And there are a lot of different ways that you can help, that you can make a difference. Being on the front lines of a protest may not be what's right for everybody. Val's talked about a lot of the reasons why they're not able to go out and protest, and there may be a lot of really valid reasons why you can't. But there are ways that you can help, and there are ways that you can contribute, and there are ways that you can learn and become better and improve. I think a lot about the song Little Changes by Frank Turner, who I know is one of your favorites, Tracy. But that's one of my favorite songs because, the first verse is kind of about how little stuff changes, but the chorus really goes into the big things stay the same if we don't make little changes. And that's really what it's about. Change yourself, change your sphere, help influence those around you to do better, help yourself to do better, find ways to improve yourself. And if everybody does that, then the big things will change and the big things will be different.
We have to start at a personal level, and then to our kids and to our families and to our friends and to our community, to a state, and then a nation, and then the world. But it's got to start with us.
When I was a senior in high school, we moved to Las Vegas, Nevada. I always joke because my parents hated me, so they moved me my senior year in high school. But I had grown up in Salt Lake, which is predominantly one race. It's predominantly white in Salt Lake, Utah. And Las Vegas is a little bit more diverse. And I remember right after we moved there, we were walking in the corner gas station, my sister and I, and there was a young man coming down the street who happened to be black. And my sister wanted to cross the street. And I was like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. Because I was like, that's just going to look really, really bad. But she was like, well, I just don't. I don't, she's matured a lot since she was in high school, and she does not have the same views, but she was like, I just don't like the looks of him. And I think that primarily what it was we hadn't encountered a lot of people of other races. And I remember kind of standing firm. We're just going to walk by him and everything. But what breaks my heart is looking back on the experience and remembering that inside I was thinking the same thing she was saying out loud. And that's something that experience has stuck out to me as something that I've tried to improve on and tried to be better about personally, and not just jump to conclusions based on what anybody looks like or how I perceive them based on what, any kind of outward appearance, whatever it might be. And those are things that each of us have to take a look at in ourselves and say, where can I be better and what can I do? And I think that that's sometimes a tough thing. So.
Yeah. I remember the first time I went to Florida. That was my first time being in an area with a lot of African Americans, and I was blown away. Oh my gosh, there's so many African American people. And it wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. It was just like, it's like you said, Jake, I'm so used to just having white people around that it was just kind of shocking to my middle school brain how many people there were. And it pains me too, because I mean, not too long ago, we were having the stories about the gentleman, and I feel awful for not remembering his name off the top of my head, but who was chased down and shot in the streets. Because
I go have a little bit harder name to pronounce.
Yeah. So please look that up. But it really struck me because I go running through my neighborhood at like 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night because it's cooler, and I've never had any sort of issue. And to think that there are people who are just going through the neighborhood in broad daylight who are chased down and gunned down, it's just, we've got to do better. Yeah.
It's and I say this wrong every time. I think it's Ahmaud Arbery.
Yes, thank you.
And yeah, I had to learn how to say that and spell that a few times, but yeah. And luckily in that scenario, if you haven't heard, 3 men have been arrested and are being charged with murder.
Yes.
So that's and you guys had that, and my daughter had such an exact opposite experience because we grew up in an area where it was predominantly Hispanic and African American families. So she went to a junior high where she was the minority. And then we moved to West Jordan where she went to Copper Hills, and she came home the first day and she's like, I have never been to a school with so many white kids before. Like it was very different for her because she grew up going to schools where there were so many mixes of races, and this was the first time that she wasn't the minority, and so we've had a lot of conversations about that as well. And so I think everybody's experiences are so different, and which is so good. And that's why we can have these conversations to understand where each other come from. And everyone has an instance, I think, like that, Jake, where you've judged someone, but we've learned. I very much I kind of get freaked out when I'm the only one in an elevator with an older white guy because in my experience, since I was younger, that's what I feared because of experiences. And so, I think we all have those instances that we judge people. And the key thing is that you've changed and that I've changed. That Tracy has changed. A lot of people have changed and that we're open to change. The biggest thing is that we have to be open to it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people on the internet that regardless how many videos they see of the truth, they're not open to change. But we've got to keep pushing and keep educating and keep an open mind, and hopefully we can move into a different time.
And there's nothing wrong with saying I was wrong, I didn't understand, or I'm those phrases, or I've changed my mind, I've become a different person. I can't remember, one of my friends posted, but they said they had a conversation with a family member who said, I never understood that Colin Kaepernick wasn't disrespecting the flag. There was a bigger issue. And I feel so bad that I felt this way. And my friend was like, hey, you're here now. We have to be able to let the past go and move forward as well.
That's all right. Roger.
Said, we've all got stuff in our past. We've all got the University of Utah defensive coordinator on the football team got suspended because of a racist tweet back or a text back in 2013. And it's, you have to say, am I a different person today than I was yesterday versus years ago? Yeah.
And I think that's so important. And I think the other thing that we have to do that's very hard. And I want to be careful how I say this, because I do agree, like, be as patient as you want to be with people online. Like if you've got friends that you just feel like I'm never going to get through to them and I barely even know this person and all they're doing is just being a troll, then just get rid of them. That's fine. Like, you do what you need to do on social media. But I do think we have to be understanding of people and allow them to change, and people that you do know and that you've gotten to know, people can change, and we need to allow them to do that and be a little bit forgiving of who they were and understand that, that's what I said 5 or 6 years ago and it was wrong and I still feel awful about it. And this is how I've changed and grown from that experience, because that's really ultimately what we want. Is we want change. We want people to become better. And we want the world to become better. I still hold out for the Star Trek utopia, that it's going to happen. We can get there. We're going to go through some rough stuff in between, but we can get there, because I believe people can change. I believe society can change, but we have to allow for that to happen too.
We learned that in Rocky IV.
Yes, that's true.
If you can change, and I can change, and we can change. Anyway.
Yeah. But so I think that social media just is not where you're going to
It's a
change
different
people's
animal.
minds, and just
Exactly.
be as patient as you feel like you need to be there, and step away if you need to. But this movie, I think, is a great movie. I think everyone should go and watch it. Take advantage of it during June. June is a big month in African American history. If you don't know what Juneteenth is, you need to go look that up. You need to read about it because it's a huge deal. And it's
documentary 13th.
nice. It's a big deal, and we should all understand what Juneteenth is, because it's not just a big deal for African Americans. It's a big part of American history, and it's something that should be celebrated and recognized. And so all of that combined into what's going on today, this is a great movie to go and watch and understand a little bit more. I'm excited to go through that list and put that out there for everybody to go through, because there's some more movies where you can step outside yourself. I think, Val, we're working on another list for LGBTQ stuff as well, because June is also Pride Month.
Right.
Take opportunities to get to know people outside yourself. That's the first step to understanding. And we've sold each other on this myth that if I understand you and I accept you for who you are, then I have to agree with everything that you say, and I have to be. And that's not true. I can understand you, I can love you, and I can tolerate you, even if I don't see eye to eye on everything that you believe. That's okay. The important thing is that we respect each other, even though we're different, and that's key.
Jake tolerates me every time
ding,
we
ding,
record.
ding, ding.
Val, I love you. It's not a toleration thing. We're good.
Jake and I often feel like you tolerate us, Val. So
That's true.
Whatever. I'm the troublemaker here.
But we did talk about a movie today. What do we want to give this as far as grades go, Val?
do you want to start?
When it came out last year, I gave it a solid B+, and I'm sticking on to that B+. I think it was an absolutely fantastic movie. The writing was great. The way that they took the story and turned it into a screenplay, sometimes that can get lost. But I thought it was great. I thought, very powerful performances all around. Even some of the sub characters that we really didn't talk about today were very powerful and intricate into the story. I would watch this over and over, and just solid B+ for me.
Yeah, I'm going to be right in the B+ A- range. It felt like it was right on the cusp of being something absolutely tremendously powerful, and it still is. But it was like it was right on the cusp, but it just didn't quite clear that far. Exactly. That's my thing. It's more on the technical level. Yeah, absolutely. But I love that people are having conversations. Our friend James Estrada, that's a friend of the show. I mean, he watched this with his 9-year-old son, sparking that conversation, having discussions like we're having today. Very, very powerful movie. If you haven't checked it out, like Jake said, it's pretty much free everywhere. I streamed it through Fandango Now last night on the big screen TV. So you really don't have an excuse to go to check this one out.
Yeah, I would give it an A- myself. I really enjoyed it. I think the performances from Michael B. Jordan as well as Jamie Foxx were incredible. This was a good reminder as to why Jamie Foxx won an Oscar quite a few years ago, because in between there we got Electro, which just wasn't very good.
I keep trying to forget about that movie.
I know, but
we had Electro and 2 Avengers in the same movie.
Yeah, it's true.
So that was good. But he's also going to be in Soul, the new Pixar movie coming out later this year.
But he has some acting chops. I mean, he is an incredible performer, and we see that in this movie, and it was good to see him get back to that form. I wish it would have been nominated for more things, especially his performance, because I do think it's powerful, and I think it just is really well done. I'm not as big a cinematic nerd as you guys are, and so I probably miss out on some of those things that you saw, but for me it was enjoyable. Enjoyable in how informative it was. Yeah. Enjoyable may not be the right word for a movie like this, but it was good.
Well, like I said earlier, it doesn't come across as preachy. It doesn't hit you over the head. It's just presenting the story to you.
Yeah.
And if
Awesome.
you've seen Just Mercy, and we've talked about it a lot today, and so tonight you need another movie to watch. Again, our top 5 are The Hate You Give, which is rated PG-13. Number 4 is Just Mercy, which we talked about. Number 3 is Do the Right Thing, definitely rated R. Number 2 is The Color Purple. And number 1 is going to be more than a one-night watch, and it's When They See Us on Netflix. It's actually a series. It's very, very hard to get through, but push through it. It's hard to get through because especially if you have kids, it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever watched in my life cinematically, was When They See Us, based on oh my gosh, we've talked about a lot of things. The Central Park Five.
Yeah.
And so, but I think especially because, like you guys said earlier, this is current. This didn't happen very long ago. And so it really hits you. But that's our top 5. If you want to see our whole top 20, you can go to our website or our Facebook page.
Exactly. So we'll have that posted this week. We appreciate you taking the time to listen. This is like I said at the beginning, a special bonus episode that we're doing. We felt like, as the 3 of us talked, that it was something we wanted to talk about on the air. We have a platform. It may not be a huge platform, but we want to use it for what we can, for what good we can do in the world. And we felt like this was appropriate. We will be back to our normal stuff again next week. We have a special guest, Eileen Dobbins, who will be on the show. We'll be talking about the movie Heathers. So that's exciting. In the meantime, like our stuff on Facebook. Please share this with those that you think might be interested. We appreciate that. And we won't see you at the movies.
Be
Bye,
more kind,
everybody.
my friends. Be more kind.